Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
People of Reddit, what's the creepiest encounter you've had with a complete stranger that still gives you chills?
Episode 5.
Like around 10 years ago, I was sitting at an alley with my girlfriend listening to some music from a nearby bar like we usually did. When all of a sudden a strange lady sat next to us. She then reached for my hand and asks me if she could hold it for a second. My girlfriend and I were a bit spooked, but there was several people around, so we didn't think of anything dangerous. I looked at her and we both thought, whatever. Suddenly she turns it around, looks at me in the eyes and tells me, "You are a great person, your hand is soft. However, you will soon travel someplace far and will have a lesson to learn." She then looked at my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and told her, "You are difficult, but take good care of him, you'll be fine." We were really scared, and immediately got up and ran to our houses and decided to just laugh about it and kind of forgot about it some weeks down the road. After approximately a month, I got my dream internship and had to travel 5 hours from home to stay at a company camp for my internship. I would only return on the weekends to see my family and go out with my girlfriend. Well, after a year like this, I had a very big problem while living over there, and my girlfriend had to really support me to live through it. Thanks to her support and overcame the issue and everything went well. However, a few months after my internship, we remembered what had happened with the lady and got the goosebumps when we talked about it and agreed the lady was spot on with what she said.
When I was 18, I visited my friend in a different city in the UK. I got a coach because although the journey was 6 hours, it was so much cheaper than a train. So, I'm on my way back to my own city on this coach. There are not very many people, maybe only a handful, so I have a window seat with no one next to me. Shortly after we head off, a man who's sitting in the row behind me taps me on the shoulder and starts asking me for my name, how old I am, etc. I instantly got weird vibes from this man. Asking a random stranger about themselves for no reason is just a no-go in my book. The coach has several stops. I'll call them stop 1, stop 2, which was mine, and stop 3, and he even asked where I was going to be getting off. Feeling creeped out, I decided to say stop 3. I didn't want to just be like, "I don't want to tell you," because as a young woman, I was worried about what the reaction to that would be like. Anyway, I managed to stop the conversation and read my book. I didn't read too much though, as I was quite conscious of feeling his eyes looking at me from the row behind. At stop 1, the coach stopped for about 15 minutes to allow people to get off, stretch their legs, go to the loo, and get food or drink at the coach station. So I hopped off and he followed behind me. I was so worried about what he might do once we were off the coach that I quickly went into the nearby female toilets, where I used the facilities and then stood there waiting until 1 minute before when we were due to get back on the coach, at which point I quickly came out and straight back on the coach to sit down. On my way back on, I noticed this man standing nearby to the toilets, just watching me come out and back on, and he quickly followed suit back onto the coach. The next stop was going to be mine, and between these two stops I heard him on the phone speaking in a language I couldn't understand to someone, but again I would occasionally look around in reflections and things, and he would always be staring at me whenever I caught a glimpse. Now my coach was scheduled to arrive at my stop in the middle of the day, so it's not like it'd be quiet or dark or anything, but I had just planned to walk into the main city and meet some friends and my boyfriend at the time for lunch. I texted my boyfriend, explained my concerns, and asked if he would be able to get in early and meet me at the coach station instead. He said yes, of course. When I finally got to my stop and got off the coach, I found the man to be getting off at my stop too, behind me. Immediately after I got off, I went straight to my boyfriend and gave him a big hug. I whispered, "Can you see him?" And he said yes, he was staring right at you constantly and following you until you hugged me, and now he's walking off the other way acting casual. The whole thing gives me shivers thinking about it, and what might have happened has my boyfriend not been there and I'd walked out the coach station alone. Although part of me thinks that surely it would have been too bold to try and kidnap an 18-year-old girl in the middle of the day on a Saturday in public.
I was on vacation with my grandparents. It was evening, my grandma and I was returning from a walk away from the hotel room. My grandpa had stayed behind to watch TV. We had to come back through a part of the neighborhood near the hotel that had no streetlights, no homes, and no other people. I had earmarked that area a different night because it scared me. On that night, right before the stretch of darkness, there was a tall man sitting on the stoop of a closed building. No one else around. As we neared him, he was already looking at us. We passed him, my grandma politely said, "Hello," but when I looked at the man, my stomach physically lurched and turned over. I've never felt a feeling in my stomach like that except to puke. The man's mouth was tensely smiling, but his eyes were absolutely not smiling. His eyes were cold, charged, and angry. Best way I can describe it is his eyes looked evil and his mouth was fake smiling. He looked like a mask. His body was rigid looking but looked like he was trying to sit and act normal. He didn't say hello back. We kept walking in silence for a few seconds. My anxiety spiked because I knew we were about to head into the dark patch. So then I whispered, "Grandma, we'd better walk fast. I got a bad feeling from that guy," and without looking at me she quietly said, "Me too." We were several steps away at that point. I turned around because the back of my neck was prickling and yes, he was still staring at us. He hadn't moved anything except his head, which was turned to look directly at us, smile still plastered on his face. I whispered that he's watching and we just power walked. My grandma knew. She's also luckily almost a faster walker than me, so we booked it through the dark in silence. Turned around again, man still there watching us in the dark and hadn't moved. Several steps later, I turned around and he was still watching. We made it into the lit area of the street and heard a group of people up ahead laughing. So huge sigh of relief once we saw them. The creepy man was all we could talk about then. I asked my grandma if she got the same feeling when she looked at the man and she said yes. I described how his eyes were dark and his mouth fake smiling. She had sensed that too. Later on the trip during the day, we walked past the building the man was sitting at. It was a shelter for mentally ill folks, but at the hour he was there, it would have been closed for the night. So he must have been going through something, maybe an episode. He really scared us, but I hope he got the help he needed.
Back in the mid-90s, I think I was 13, my mom and I went to the mall. I had birthday money to spend, and I wanted to spend it all at a specific clothing store that catered to teens and tweens. My mom wanted to do her own shopping, so she left me there and said she'd be back in a half hour. I was browsing clothing towards the store entrance, and I was also people watching. I was excited to be on my own at the mall. It was one of the first times I had been given that freedom, and I had just become a teenager, so I was feeling pretty grown up. As I'm browsing, I happened to make eye contact with a middle-aged guy passing the store. When our eyes met, he stopped, turned around, and entered the store, all while maintaining eye contact. I was a very cautious child, and his behavior seemed weird, so I headed straight for the registers. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just started browsing items near the store clerks. I stayed as close to them as I could while still looking like I was just shopping. He browsed the store for less than a minute, looked at me one last time, and left. I stayed by the registers until my mom returned. I never told her about it, and I can't say for sure, but I really think that man had ill intent. I'm about to turn 40, and I still remember the feeling of fear and dread.
Western Australia, around 2010-11, was walking home from work late as I think I had been having a couple drinks with coworkers. Not far from home in a suburb, no one else around, all of a sudden a car pulls up next to me quite fast. I recall it was a 4WD or van of some kind, and before I can react, like 4 to 5 guys are all about to jump out. I immediately think I'm so exhausted, because it seemed clear I was about to be mugged or bashed or something, but no sooner had the car pulled up and they're about to jump out, I hear one guy saying something along the lines of, "Nah, this guy's white," and they all stopped getting out and the car just peels off. Waited until they were definitely well and truly gone and called 000 to report it, not sure if anything came of it, but I made a point to tell the police what the guy said. Not sure if they were looking for a specific person or they were out to jump some poor POC. Me, 14 at the time, and my family go to Scotland once a year for a week holiday. We often try to see the Northern Lights because the part of Scotland we visit is very secluded and has little light pollution. One year, we drove to a quiet field in basically the middle of nowhere and I stood beside the car with my little sister, 10, and my mum, wrapped in blankets because it's Scotland in October and is absolutely freezing. We weren't paying much attention to our surroundings and were just looking up at the stars and trying to see any colors. Suddenly this man appeared, like he must have walked over from somewhere cause it was an empty field apart from this tiny stone building, but I swear he just appeared out of nowhere, and stood right next to my mum. She assumed it was her boyfriend at the time, and because of how little light pollution there was, it was essentially black outside, so she couldn't see his face properly. Anyway, she looked up and I just remembered seeing the fear on her face since this random man in a literal trench coat was stood directly next to her. He looked down at her and Mum said, "Oh, I didn't see you there. You scared me," with a nervous laugh, but this guy just looked down at her and said quietly, but loud enough for us to hear, "You can see Transylvania from here," and looked out at the city lights miles away. She looked at me and my sister and calmly said, "Okay girls, let's get back in the car," but I knew she was properly shook up. We got back in the car and obviously locked the doors, and my mum was telling us how scared she was when we saw him walk into an area of longer grass and very slowly sit down with his legs directly straight out in front of him, and then he lay down but with his arms at his sides, like a vampire, and didn't move. We reversed out and drove away. Hiking the ad in West Virginia in college, and we hitched a ride back to our car because we got way off course over a week and needed to get back to school. None of us had seen Deliverance, so we met a guy at a gas station and my buddies jumped in the back of the pickup, and since I was clearly the bravest, dumbest, I rode shotgun. The conversation got weird quick and he was asking about my friend's shorts, a lot. I kept talking about our families and how we were going to one friend's parents' house on the way back to school because we care about our families. Really trying to sell that people will miss us and look for us when we go missing. We got close enough, we thanked him and gave him some gas money, and they hop out of the back and the dude asks my friend about his shorts, and since he didn't hear anything on the way he starts showing them off. I about tackle him to get going. A few weeks later we watched Deliverance and we are not been right since. Back in 2020 my wife, fiancée at the time, and I were fishing off a pier in the Monterey Bay. It was about 11 o'clock at night. I had my SUV backed into the parking spot so I could have the tailgate open and have all my fishing gear right there next to us. As the parking spots are near the edge of the pier, there was very few people around who were mainly employees of the restaurants that were in the pier. My wife was looking at the water, standing at the guard rail leaning over it just a bit. I was standing at the car looking through my gear. I had turned towards my wife to tell her something when I had seen a blonde woman about mid-30s standing about a foot behind my wife staring at her. I was about 3 feet away. Neither my wife nor I had heard her approach at all. So I, being very shocked and alarmed, took a giant step toward them to get in between them. When I got in between them and looked at the lady, she had a blank stare on her face and then looked like she was shocked and snapped back to reality when I had asked if she needed something. At that point she calmly said no and walked away. It was super eerie and didn't sit right to us. The lady looked completely normal other than creepily staring at my wife from such a close distance. We didn't visit that town again for about 2 years. Maybe not the creepiest, but it happened hours ago today. While I was walking out of LA Fitness at Town and Country. An old man was like, "Excuse me, are you super busy?" I said no, and asked what was going on, and he said that he was handicapped and needed to go get some gasoline. What that meant kept changing, but I offered to help until he insisted on riding in my car. He kept saying, "Well, I'm handicapped, so I can't walk out to the lot, can you go get me gasoline?" I told him I'd give him money for gas, or would have a gallon tank brought here, but he kept insisting on riding in my car. Not being an idiot, I said, "Look, I can't give you a ride, but I'll buy you a tank of gas, or we'll bring you a tank of gas, so I'm not sure what your objection to this would be, to be honest," and the guy looked at me like I was ruining his 3-card Monty scam. If you bother the lobby of an LA Fitness over your supposed handicap, but don't want to get a full tank, or have your gallon jug filled up, you're up to some creepy bullshit. He made my skin crawl, straight up. If I was destitute and needed just a few gallons, I'd count my lucky stars when some hungover idiot is like, "Here's $20, go fill up your car." But I guess I don't have that scammer genome. A lot of people let their guard down around people with disabilities. Mostly that's fine because most people with disabilities are awesome. But if you work with this population long enough, you find some who are terrible people. One guy who had relatively minor intellectual disabilities used to rape another of my clients in her apartment, in part because he knew she could never testify against him. I always wondered if he learned this from his slimy dad. When we found out what was happening, we called the police, his dad, and the local disabled rights advocacy program officials. We couldn't do anything about it. But after the police talked to him, he stopped doing it. His dad insisted that since the victim couldn't say what he had done, when he did it, etc., that he couldn't be arrested. How could he prove he was innocent if they couldn't even say what days it was happening or how often it happened? This all occurred before I started working there, so I had never met him. One day when some strange guy walked into the building, I got a really bad, almost panicky feeling. I found out that this was him. Still creepy as hell, even 8 years later. We had just had our first child and I was losing him and our groceries into the van. We were parked next to a Suburban with blacked out windows and the cart was in front of me, so I didn't really have a good escape. I had just buckled kiddo in when I hear, "Hey man," and turn around to 2 methyl-looking guys blocking my way and quite close and looking at me like I was lewd in a game. I don't know where my mind went, but I replied, "I don't mind killing you both," and stepped forward, which was apparently not the response they were looking for. They took off. I didn't tell my wife and wasn't honestly freaked out till I was out of the parking lot and my brain said, "Safe, now freak out." I pulled over and had as quiet a panic attack as possible because baby boy wasn't crying and I really didn't want him to. When I was really young, about 6 to 8 years old, I was at an aunt's house in a different city for some kind of party. I wandered off, ended up by some railroad tracks near the underside of a bridge that had foliage on either side obscuring the view to the dark underbelly. A couple of older kids walked out and tried to get me to follow them under the bridge where no one would be able to see us. My spider sense immediately went off. There was just something about the way the older kids were smiling and looking at me that creeped me out. To be fair, the memory is a bit hazy being so long ago, but I definitely remember how it made me feel. That was the first and only time I ever felt genuine fear. Not only gives me the chills, but changed my life. Back in 1997, I went to a convenience store with a friend. I got a bottle of water, my friend got a small bottle of milk, back when milk chugs were popular. I took them to the counter. The guy behind the counter has a very distinct look to him. Older, maybe 40s, but looked rough. Tan, wrinkly, bald, long pointy gray beard. Piercings and tattoos everywhere. He rang the 2 items and in a scratchy, shrieky, witch-like voice said, 222, 1/3 the number of the beast. I paid and we got out of there fast. Ever since that day, I see that number daily. Addresses, phone numbers, the time on the clock. I got a new debit card. It was the expiration date and it was in the number. Interviewed for a job last week. When I got there, the last 3 numbers on the mileage of my car were 222. Coincidentally, after I left the interview and checked my watch, the time was 3:33. I have seen the number twice in one day, but never 3 times. I don't know why, or what it means. But I see it every single day. For the last 26 years. In about 2011, my then girlfriend and I, now my wife, went backpacking through Europe. We went to Delirium in Belgium and some random guy approached me, claimed he lived in New York City, he had a foreign accent, and he carried an American flag in his jacket for some reason. He was sitting at our table later on, uninvited. And I told him we were meeting up with a big group of us, so we had to go. We weren't with a big group, just the 2 of us. But he gave me the creeps. Innate bad vibes feeling. Such a weird energy to feel. I've got 2 that immediately come to mind, and both of them happened at the bus station when I was in college. A very large man came up to me and asked for my number and was loudly offended when I wouldn't give it to him. He introduced himself as Big Mike and said he just wanted to get to know me and said I'd really missed out because he had pills he was going to give me. Luckily, it was the middle of the day and there were tons of people around and it stopped there. I saw an article in the local paper about him about a year later that said he'd stabbed someone, and then run down the road entirely naked before getting arrested. The second one was also in the middle of the day at the bus station and a very creepy older man in an ancient-looking suit came up and told me he was looking for a pretty girl to sing Christian music. I told him I couldn't sing and I wasn't Christian and he said it was too bad, because he had a big recording studio downtown and he wanted to make me famous. He gave me a business card that only had a phone number and a name on it, nothing else. I lived in that town my entire life. There is definitely no recording studio downtown. Back when I was about 9, maybe older, my grandma took me and 2 of my younger brothers out for the day. Eventually, after a bit of driving around, she took us into a store to buy us lollies/candy. A couple seconds after we entered, another man walked in behind us and started getting all in our faces and doing little baby voices to my brothers, who were toddlers themselves. He then offered to pay for our lollies, which was kind of him and we didn't think too much of, but then he really started getting quite pushy and was following us around closely as we picked a small bag of what we wanted. After paying, my grandma had caught on that he was a bit weird, so she thanked him and said that we'd be on our way, but he didn't really acknowledge it. He then followed us outside and walked with us back to the car, talking non-stop about how cute we all are. It was this point I started getting scared. He then went on about us coming into his pizza shop sometime and said he'd take me and my brothers out the back where we could make pizzas together. Anyway, my grandmother started getting firm with him, saying that it's time for him to go now, etc. Eventually he left and we all hopped in the car and drove off and never saw him again. Till this day I never really known if he was actually a creep or if he was genuinely just a nice guy. I should also add he was a very tall bald man, maybe late 50s, and that my grandma had tried to tell him to leave multiple times before he actually did. Yeah, probably a creep. Probably the time when me and my sister were kicking a soccer ball in the front yard and a dude pulled up in his black, 5-seater, car and asked us if we wanted some dogs. Both of the 2 dogs were in the passenger seat. I told the guy that we didn't need any more pets because we already had 2 cats. The guy kept insisting that we take the dogs for free because he and his wife couldn't take care of them anymore. I denied again, saying that we didn't want the dogs. The guy was not happy that we kept refusing to take the dogs and he tried to grab my sister by her arm and pull her into the car. I was quite strong for my age, and since he only had one arm on her I was able to pull her back from the car. My mom saw us by the car and she ran outside and she let both of us tell our stories and she wanted to end this whole thing, so we ended up taking both dogs and the guy drove away. If you were wondering, we named them Gohan and Goten, from Dragon Ball Z. Sadly they passed away 2 years later, but they will forever be in our hearts.
Once, I was camping alone in the middle of nowhere, dispersed camping on BLM land. Seriously, no one around. A guy came and camped near me. Kind of weird, but he seemed okay. Cut to the middle of the night, and my dogs start growling. Footsteps approach my tent. Dogs start barking so it was hard to hear, but he was definitely whispering about murder. It turned out he was just having some sort of mental break, though, and was actually trying to help me. He thought there were people in the hills trying to kill us. I got him calmed down and called 911. Luckily, we did have cell reception, and the police were really good with him. So good end result, but I still think about that sometimes and wonder what I would have done if he wasn't just a crazy dude who needed some help, or if I didn't have phone reception or whatever. I think I would have been okay. I had a very big German Shepherd with me, and a couple other less intimidating dogs who were actually way more likely to bite than the GSD, but it's really freaky to think about it. That was like a decade ago, and I've changed absolutely nothing, though. I still camp and hike alone a lot. Do always bring my dogs, but that's mostly just because I love my dogs. I had a guy at a bar start trying to hit on me, or so I assumed. Turned out actually he was big into Scientology and used to run a center in California. And then dude starts telling me how I should really come with him to learn more about Scientology at a second location. All this happened while my buddy in the bathroom. To be fair, he was a cokehead and was in there for 12 minutes. When my buddy came back out and the guy realized I wasn't alone, he seemed really nervous and left what looked like way too much money on the counter and speed walked out of there. He didn't even get near my drink, but I poured it out in the bathroom. Still sketches me out. As a kid, 12, skateboarding around the softball fields, my sister was practicing there with her team, a middle-aged guy and maybe a teen? A younger man for sure, started talking to me and my buddy. He asked if there were any good skate spots around. I said they were going to build a skate park here soon, but other than that there are just some good hills to bomb around here. He asked if we would like to come along with him and show him and said he could give us a ride back. My inner alarm started going off and we got the hell out of there. Still crazy to me looking back and thinking about how close I probably was to being kidnapped.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.